What can we expect to see come out of Blinken's visit to the Middle East, his fifth since the 7th of October? Because it seems like the ball is now in Hamas's court whether this truce deal goes ahead or not, doesn't?
Good afternoon. I think there are many balls that are juggled at the moment. It's one has to deal, of course, with the war in Gaza and bringing truce and the release of the hostages and moving to more humanitarian aid into Gaza. But there are other balls as we speak, whether it's the attacks by the Houthis, whether what happens with Hezbollah in Lebanon, the attack versus transnational organization. So there's a lot of their things to reduce the tension, to prevent, we are already in the midst of a conflict, just to try to de-escalate it. And one major issue there is to bring as quickly as possible a truce between Hamas and Israel. Whether it is achievable at this visit or another visit, it's a good question. But the visit to Saudi Arabia, the visit to Egypt and Qatar is to bring on board all these countries that A, don't want to see further escalation, B, as the influence on Hamas to speed up their consideration of what's on the table.
Yossi, yes, of course, Antony Blinken will have to dial down the regional tensions, given, as you said, what we've seen with the Houthis and Iran-backed militias in the past few days. But also, another factor which he may not be able to control is far-right members of the Israeli government who could potentially torpedo this truce deal, even though it was negotiated here in Paris by intelligence officials, including the head of Mossad. So how can you explain that?
Well, this is another complexity, a massive one for the United States actually to rein into this far right in Israel. And the first sign of it came when the Biden administration imposed sanctions on four settlers that were involved in settler terrorism in the West Bank. And we saw the reaction from one of the banks, for instance, is immediately to comply with that, which shows the kind of the leverage that the United States has vis-a-vis Israel, whether it's diplomatic or economic or military, in order to run into the far right. And the problem is not just the far right. I think sometimes the far right is becoming distraction. The problem is Netanyahu himself. He is the one that legitimized the far right. He's the one that brought them into government. He is the one that doesn't fire them, while they actually get Israel in all sorts of problem from The Hague through so what we see the tensions with the US. So that's what the challenge for the Biden administration, to use all the kind of the leverage the levers that they have in order to make this agreement possible.
Because you're right. At the end of the day, Prime Minister Netanyahu is the one who technically is calling the shots in Israel, even though we've seen him say things that fly in the face of what the United States wants, like things like he doesn't want to see a Palestinian state in the aftermath of this war, even though, Yossi, it's been, nearly 4 months that Israel's offensive has continued. The army has pretty much decimated the enclave, yet the goal of eliminating Hamas is far from achieved. So doesn't that domestic pressure to strike a deal and do whatever it takes to bring those hostages home weigh on the prime minister? Or is it just about staying in power?
To be honest, in ideal world, Netanyahu would have not been right now the prime minister. His massive failure on October 7 and the months that led to it and the attack on the Israeli democracy and the way he conducts the war is not fit to be a prime minister anymore, and he should be replaced. But there are constitutional arrangements in Israel, and without election or changing coalition, it's not going to happen. So something has to happen within the Israeli political system. But no doubt in my mind, he is the bottleneck in Israel politics, and as a result of it, in the way it conducts the war in Gaza, that got Israel in deep trouble on the international arena, and also bringing to an end, because he, in many ways, has personal interest in prolonging it, because if he's not prime minister anymore, then he's facing the corruption trial without the power or the power of being in the prime minister office. And that's again one of the complexities here, that we could see that coming on many other issues. But that's why the United States is so crucial in bringing this truce and putting the pressure where pressure is needed.
Speaking of pressure, one of the things Antony Blinken will be trying to apply pressure on is getting more aid into Gaza. I don't understand how it's been months and the US has been talking about getting more humanitarian aid into Gaza. Israel seems to be dragging its foot on this point. They've even managed to successfully halt funding to UNRWA over these allegations that 12 members were involved in these attacks. We obviously don't know what those allegations really entail until those findings come out at the start of March. But how do you explain that Israel has been able to successfully hamper aid coming into the enclave despite pressure from the international community, despite repeated messages from the U.S. President Joe Biden, from the U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken?
I think we should put order a little bit. Some, humanitarian aid, definitely not enough, is entering into Gaza as we speak, but there is a need for much more aid to enter and not to be blocked. There is another need, which is that Hamas won't control the aid there, and the aid will end in the hands of the people that need it desperately in Gaza. Thirdly, the attack on UNRWA. Without disputing that 12 people were involved in that terrorist attack, let's assume that it's correct. There is no need, as a result of it, to defund UNRWA, that under the most difficult of circumstances still provides basic humanitarian help to 2.3 million people, 1.37 million Gazan that are displaced. So I think that's exactly where all this activity should move into this direction, that involves truce, exchange of hostages for prisoners, and massive humanitarian aid for a prolonged time entering into Gaza.
Yossi, we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you very much for joining us on the program today. Yossi Mekelberg joining us there from London.